Welcome to Town Talk.
A brand new show brought to you by the City of Victoria. We're your hosts,
Ashley
and Shane. You'll hear stories of the city and of Victorians just like you who make it an awesome place to live.
That's right. So listen in to stay informed and entertained. Join us for Town Talk. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Town Talk. It's our new podcast where we talk about everything happening at the City of Victoria, your local government, and everything happening within our community. One of the big things that's happening right now is the 2020 census. And so who better to have than these three people to visit with us today? And so I'd like to introduce you to Celeste Menchaca, our development coordinator. Is that right? I want to make sure I get that right.
Development coordinator.
Bethany Castro, who's with Perpetual Help. She's our executive director. And Jodi Sandoval. She's the Be Well coordinator. Is that right?
Yeah. We'll
How
go
about
with
you
that.
tell us who you are?
Community health worker would Be Well Victoria.
Community health worker.
Yeah.
Okay. Noted. So obviously we're socially distanced. We're here in downtown, beautiful Victoria today. It's sunny outside, so we're happy to be talking today. The first question I really wanted to focus on is introducing yourselves, more about what you do. Give us a little bit about how you're involved in the community. I know that you're very actively involved. You're a part of our Complete Count Census Committee, which is an initiative the city has launched with my department in communications, Celeste's in planning, to better engage the community with leaders such as yourself, make sure that we get counted. So can each of you introduce yourself, talk a little bit more about what you do and how you're involved in the community?
Yes, I'll go first. My name again is Bethany Castro. I'm the executive director at Perpetual Help Home, which is a transitional home for women here in town. We've been here for 25 years. So really proud of the work that we do there. And then also in partnership with Be Well Victoria, I'm part of the Southside Community Coalition, which was launched in January of 2019. And we're just really trying to unify the Southside community and get some different initiatives going. And then on the Complete Count Committee, I'm the subcommittee chair for Health and Human Services, which is basically nonprofits in hospitals and nursing homes, and trying to make sure that everyone in those locations get counted.
Well, you've been a huge asset to our effort, so we appreciate you being on that committee. Thank you. And Jodi?
Yeah, so my name is Jodi Sandoval, I said earlier, and I am with Be Well Victoria. We are located inside the Public Health Department. Our grant is actually through the Hogg Foundation. So the cool thing is with Be Well Victoria, we get to go out into the community and really have conversations with people who are normally excluded from the table as far as decision making. We call it HEPs, Historically Excluded Population.
Just to catch everyone up to speed, maybe for those who aren't aware of what the census is, Celeste, can you give us a summary?
So the 2020 census is a count of everyone in our nation, and it's conducted every 10 years. The first census was taken in 1790, and what we're basically doing is telling everybody, hey, we're here in Victoria, we count, please don't forget us. So for instance, with federal funding, we get money based on our population count. We get two federal grants. One is the Community Block Grant that is given to us by the U.S. Department of Housing. We also get a transportation grant that our Metropolitan Policy Organization is in charge of. So what we want is to be able to tell the nation's capital that, hey, we all live in Victoria. If something happens, please remember us. And if, for instance, with the pandemic right now, we were given some extra funds through the CDBG CARES Act. So with that kind of money, we could potentially get more funding to help our citizens. So some of the things we're doing with the COVID funding is we're trying to get Meals on Wheels, try to get some job training for those who were affected by COVID, get some pay utility assistance, but that funding can be completely cut down if they don't know we're here.
Right.
So usually to get that CDBG grant, we have to have 50,000 or below. So let's take, for instance, our 2010 census. Back then, Victoria was considered about just over 60,000. As we've been doing research, we pretty much know we've grown tremendously.
Right.
We're at least over 70,000 now, and those are some
big numbers. I mean, and then county is like 90,000, 95,000.
Correct.
So we're growing.
So yes, we need them to know, hey, we got more people here. We need the funds to help support them. It's
Right.
good. We're not saying it's bad what we're getting, because we're still helping people with the funds we get.
Yeah.
But it would be great if we could get more to help more people get those funds spread further. For instance, in some of our past CDBG projects with that federal funding, we've created parks, we've done splash pads. We can provide sidewalks in some of our lower income communities. Some of our upcoming things we're planning to do with some of that federal funding is add street park lighting to places like Queen City Park, MLK Park, Pine Street Park. So those are just some things we're looking for. Also, those funds can help with our transportation, our roadways, the streets overall.
Right.
So we need to make sure everyone is counted. We
Right.
don't want to leave anybody out.
So everyone needs to get counted, because the amount of people that are counted here in Victoria reflects the amount of funding that we receive here in the community. If we don't get counted, we lose out on those funds, and other people will get it, because it's how much money, like billions of dollars of federal
Yeah, it's
funding
like
that
almost
gets
65
distributed.
billion.
That's a huge amount of money that gets distributed to different communities based on their population. And so if we're not showing, hey, we've got a pretty good growing population here, we're not going to get our hands into that cookie jar, basically.
Yeah, and even think about it. With our kids, those numbers affect our school funding, our medical funding, even attracting new businesses to town.
Right. Very
I
important.
know everybody wants a certain business to come, but if they're not seeing the numbers that they're not going to do well, they're not going to consider us. So if
Right.
we get everybody to give that accurate count, we can draw in some new businesses, some new
Right.
opportunities for us
For
as a
sure,
whole.
and help our community grow.
Mhm.
So Celeste, clearly you have a lot of knowledge about the census as a development coordinator. And so that's how you're important to this complete count committee that we as the city are leading. Bethany, what's your role in the complete count committee that we have this year for the census?
Well, technically, I guess I'm the subcommittee chair for Health and Human Services, and so really just trying to talk to different nonprofits. The hospitals and nursing homes are included in that group as well, trying to make sure that all of our clients are counted, or at least if we can't help them get counted, our own selves, then make sure that they're aware of the importance of being counted. Something just an analogy I thought of, or I've been thinking, I guess, as y'all were talking, is the federal funding is basically like a big old pie, and if we're counted correctly, then we get the right slice that
Right.
fits our needs. But if we're not counting everyone that's here, then we're going to get a measly old slice, and everybody's having to fight over it.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just so important, is to make sure that the people who are here are on the map. That another thing that I was thinking is it determines our representation in Congress
Right.
as well. And so the louder your voice is going to be heard, the more representation you have. And so it's super important to be counted. We heard some figures last week that were really kind of like, guys, we have to do better. We heard that kind of our south side of town, where my heart really lies, is only at 33% response. And our goal is 100%. And
Right.
so we really have to make sure we're getting out to our neighbors and stressing the importance of being counted.
So what are some ways that you think the census and that federal funding that we could potentially receive could help your community?
I know some of our big goals for the south side of town, that as we talk to our neighbors, is more opportunities for kids and youth. That's one of the major things. And so parks and splash pads right there, you're speaking my language, Les. We would love to have one of those, south of Wan Lin if possible.
Right.
And so if we know that a good number of people live there, then hopefully we can start to ask the city for those things, and they'll have the money to do it.
Right.
I think that's a big thing. We also live in an older part of town, and so there aren't a lot of sidewalks. Transportation is kind of difficult if you're on foot. And so hopefully some of these funds could put in some projects there that make access by pedestrians easier.
And you guys are in the trenches. You guys see these community members in that specific area, the hard to count areas, a lot easier than maybe some of us do. And so it's great to hear that from you guys. I hope that resonates with that community through this podcast as well. And hopefully we can get everyone to complete the census. Jodi, can you tell us a little bit more about your role with the census?
Yeah, so I'm a part of the committee really to reach those hard to reach communities where people really don't like you coming and knock on their door and asking them who lives in their home.
Yeah.
So just making the census real,
Yeah.
normal, and making those relationships with people who live there and explaining to them what census is. Like it's not somebody coming and being nosy, trying to
Right.
see what's going on in your home. It's really a way that our communities can be valued and heard, and it's important that everybody's counted, even the little bitty babies that are inside.
That's right. Well, I know that confidentiality, you kind of alluded to that. People don't want to be knocking on my door and, wondering who's that stranger coming and asking me questions. Celeste, can you talk about the confidentiality of the census and completing that and responding to it?
Yes. So when those census takers come to your door, they've already taken an oath that they are bound by law. They cannot release any of your information. I mean, if they were to even let anything slip, they're looking at 75 years in jail,
Wow.
some major fines.
Yeah.
So these census takers are keeping everything completely secret. Also, when we're looking at, once you respond, those responses won't become public till 75 years later. So your information is protected. They can't give it to law enforcement. They can't give it to any other governmental agencies. Yes, they're asking you your name, your date of birth, but none of that is actually reported to anybody when they give that numbers. Really, you turn into just a number.
Right.
So that's all they're reporting is 5 people live here. Yes, you gave this information, but in the end, you're just a number of, hey, 5 people were here. We count them. We know they're here.
And with some additional demographics that I think really help so that we know, are we growing? Are we getting smaller? Because you'll know 5 people live here and 3 of them are under 3, right? And so once you're able to put in a few bits of information there and now it goes into a big pile of data, then now everyone has a better idea of who they need to serve and how they need to prepare for the future.
Exactly. Because if you're looking at a household that has 3 small children, we want to make sure those kids are counted, because in the next 10 years, that can affect their schooling. We want more schools to be built, not taken away, because we're showing it. Or we're getting an older population. We need more medical services. So that's why they're getting those demographics. But it's not to use or harm anybody. They just want to give that.
To make sound decisions for funding and application of the funding.
Right. And just on that point, like if there are 3 small kids in a household, but that household isn't counted and that happens again and again all throughout our neighborhoods, then do you think the city, when they do get this money, is going to go build a splash pad for a bunch of old folks? No. They need to know that young people live there and are going to use this.
That is
I think
so
that's
true.
a really big part of it too, is just that demographic piece. I would like to point out from what Jodi and I do that another hard to count population is the homeless. And we've had some big things come up in our city that have asked, are we serving our homeless population well? And so again, that's one of those populations. I'll let you speak to that a little bit, Jodi. That it's hard to get a hold of sometimes, and are very distrusting for many good reasons. But having those numbers or not is going to determine whether or not we get to provide the right services for them.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where Be Well came in at, to see what are those barriers that's stopping that population from being counted. A lot of times we just assume because we have access to computers and we have access to get on our smartphone and do our census that everybody else has that ability. So this bringing Be Well Victoria in was a really good conscious decision to make sure that we were saying, okay, are we really doing everything that we need to do as a city, as a county, to make sure that everybody's valued and everybody counts?
Right.
And I know we were talking about federal grants, but we also receive some state grants that, they go to the state that are from the federal government. But like our Continuum of Care grant, our Emergency Solutions grant, those are actually grants we receive in city, but the city is not in charge of them. We have some of our local nonprofits, such as Mid-Coast and Community Action, which those funds are used to help our homeless population. And so the accurate count also benefits them as well. So it's not just the federal grants. We're looking at other state grants out there too, or any other grant opportunities where we can show the data we have that, hey, we're here, count us.
One thing I was going to ask Jodi, thanks. Earlier, you mentioned that they're harder to count. They don't have access to the same resources that we do, not just the homeless population, but talk a little bit more about how you've been able to, by working through our committee, help that audience or that group learn more about the census, or maybe get access to the resources they need to get counted.
Well, just recently we teamed up with Census in the city of Victoria at a event we were having where we collaborated with C3 Victory Church. They were having a movie and dinner night. And so the city and Census came out, and not only did community members have access to dinner and a movie, but they were also able right then and there to do their census. I mean, the iPad was there for them to be able to do it. I think just having access says a lot. It's not just saying, hey, we want to count you. It's saying, hey, we want to count you, and we're going to give you the tools that you need to be counted.
Right. So have either of you responded to the census yet? Can you talk a little bit, if you have, about your experience?
Sure. Yes, I was so excited to do it. Like as soon as I'm such a nerd, but as soon as it came in the mail, I was like, census time. Something that was weird is this is another person or group who needs to be counted, but my husband and I recently became foster parents. And so we knew we had a new kid coming in, but I didn't know any of her information. So I waited. I kind of tucked it in a drawer.
Patiently waited, right?
Not very patiently. Tucked it in a drawer and waited until, she moved in with us and we knew a little more about her demographic information. I was able to add her because otherwise she might not have been counted, right? She might have been one of those people in flux that just wasn't in a household at that time. And so, yes, it was like April 1st and I did my census. But yes, I'm excited.
So what was your experience? Was it easy? Was it
super
brief?
easy? I did it on my phone, actually, and it very user-friendly. You just kind of click the information in. It does ask kind of birth date, so make sure you have that information available for everyone that lives in your house, just so they can figure out how old the people are, and just those sort of overarching demographic information in just less than 10 minutes for 5 of us. So
awesome. Jodi?
It is super easy. I was going to say I was a lagger, but I did do it. Just wanted to bring a joke to the table. Super easy. I was excited, but more than that, I wanted to see what the question said. Because if I was going to go out and say, hey, do your census, I wanted to make sure that I knew what kind of questions would be on there, because that's one of the questions they were going to ask me. Well, what is the census and what kind of questions are on there? So super easy. And even explain to my kids. I have a set of twins that just turned 10. And just think, in 10 more years, they're going to be 20, and they're going to be doing their own census. So I was like, every 10 years we do this. And so it was a really good learning opportunity for them as well.
That's great. I was thinking the same thing. I have a 3-year-old that, next census she'll be 13. And that's just like a whole different range of things going on, right? And you just had a baby, right? And so just to think about the future. And to think if we have a large number of people who aren't doing that, then our kids aren't going to have, and their kids won't have the same resources that they might have otherwise. Right. It's so important. I did want to bring up something.
Shoot.
Because we said confidential, but we didn't really address directly the citizenship question.
That's very true.
And I know back, kind of last year, there was a lot of talk about whether or not there's going to be a question asking if each person in the household was a citizen or not. And there is not a citizenship question. I can assure you I did my census very quickly. And really what we need to know at this point is how many people live here.
Right.
We really, for the census purposes, we could care less what your status might be, but we can't provide the services that you or your family needs unless we know that you're here. And that to me is so very important. And it's something that's very near and dear to my heart because I used to teach in San Antonio, inner city San Antonio, and had quite a few students that, didn't have like the status that they might have wanted, but they count too. And that's something that's very, very important to me.
Going off that with the citizenship question, I know when we were doing the event, I was asked, well, why do they want to know my Hispanic or non-Hispanic? They felt like it was kind of that catch-22. And we just simply explained, they're just trying to figure out your origin. If you're worried about that question, there is an option called other, and you can just type in Hispanic, and that is perfully acceptable if you don't want to actually go full detail, because they felt like it was a trap. So trying to put them at ease that, you know what, you don't have to pick one of these, just do other, and you can type Hispanic and it will accept that. You don't have to actually put an actual nationality in there. So
that's good information.
So have you guys gotten a lot of questions about that, about citizenship, about security, confidentiality? That seems to be the the repeating issue that I get as well, is how is it confidential? How do I know it's not going to get sold? Well, it's not a business. We're not, in the business of getting people's data and then selling it. And then you're going to get, bombarded with emails, nothing like that. And the citizenship question, like Celeste said, is not on the census. So that has nothing to do with it. It's all about the numbers.
Yeah, I think another question that I hear a lot is, how does that affect my community? And so that's why Celeste and I were talking earlier about transportation and things like that, because especially on the South Side, transportation is a big gap sometimes. And Celeste, do you want to talk a little bit about how transit started in 2010, maybe?
Well, those numbers were used, and kind of based on how I believe, don't quote me on it, is how they developed where stops are, where people were, just kind of start setting up those lines. But with the 2020, it would be good to know, where has our population grown? Where do we need more transit stops? Because transit's budget is affected by our population as well. They're also an entity that relies on grant funds and funding. So if that we're not showing, we have a very big population, especially one that won't use our transit system. We don't want to have a potential of loss of that. Not that I'm saying that would ever happen, but we want to be able to show, hey, we have more people down here. We need some better stops, maybe some later times. How can we do it? But it goes back to, we need to count everybody.
Right.
So hopefully.
Hopefully we get funding and representation for public transportation. Are there any other areas that you think funding could help with?
Really just the medical, the school, and
Healthcare,
business.
that's huge.
So especially
Education.
during this time of pandemic. So, I mean, our census can help us in many ways.
Right.
We just want everybody to be counted. And one thing I'm sorry, I didn't touch on earlier, when we were kind of giving those census updates, usually we're done with the census by now. Usually by the end of July, they're done counting.
Right.
With the pandemic and all, everything has been kind of pushed back.
Right.
Originally, Census Day was April 1st, but due to being shut down, not wanting people to kind of interact and keep that social distance, even the census workers weren't going anywhere. So now they've extended the date. We're counting everybody till September 30th. I want to say the enumerators are coming out to those unresponsive households beginning this month, doing that door-to-door knocking, keeping their social distance. So you'll see the census workers out in full force, but they're not going to invade your space. And like when you were talking about earlier, coming in, they're not even coming into houses. They're basically knocking on the door, standing back, asking. You can stand outside with them, have that 6 feet between y'all, and answer your questions. So that's just some little quick updates.
Yeah, one thing we also didn't notify or talk about was the fact that of all years for them to go digital and allow the census to be taken online,
that is
this
true.
year is the first year that they've ever done that. It's always been by mail-in form, which is the most common questionnaire.
Yes.
And so now you're able to do it by visiting my2020census.gov. How perfect is that? So it's super easy. I know not everyone has access to Wi-Fi or tablets, but we have places like the public library.
Yes.
You know, we had those events that Jodi was talking about that people can come and if we're involved in those and participating, fill it out. And so that's been huge. That's been extremely convenient for me, I'll say.
Yes, and they can still call in. And if they did receive
That's
that
right.
paper form, you still have it. One thing we're also working on is getting an iPad at our 700 Main Center in front of the utility billing office, so people can also take it there. But I've also talked with one of our Census Bureau reps about having somebody in person there on some days that they'll help you take it, or they can
that'd be
actually
great.
take your information. If you're not computer savvy or smart tablet or smartphone, we'll have somebody there who can enter your information, and they have taken the oath to complete confidentiality.
Right.
So that's just another option we'll hopefully have in place soon.
Right. So I guess I'll ask one last question to you all just to wrap it up. And so, Celeste, if you could have that representation of people completing the census, responding to the census, and getting funding for our community, what area would you like to see it applied towards? How would it impact you personally? Be thinking about that, you two over there.
Personally, I would really like to see for our educations. I have 2 young nieces who are still young. One's 3 and one's in 4th grade. So knowing the next 10 years, the education system and everything, I would really love to see it go in there. And for my job purposes, I'd love to see business planning, development. So definitely so, education and business.
Education and business is huge. For me personally, I would say healthcare. I see a lot, I guess, from working in the press briefings with Dr. McNeil and other public health experts about the impact COVID is having on our healthcare. And so I'm more in tune of what's going on, what the needs are. And so just seeing our healthcare impact from the benefits of completing the census and getting that funding and that representation for Victoria would be great. I would appreciate that. Bethany.
So many answers. But I think I'm going to focus in on like a job one where I would just love to see even more funds invested in services for those who are homeless or those who are right on the edge of homelessness, and making sure that we have those transitional homes and other shelters and things to make sure that people are truly able to get back on their feet in a way that's supportive, and then and never really need those services again. You know, it's not just kind of a cycle, it's a hand up to make sure that we have some really stable families and individuals here in Victoria.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It's hard for me to just pick one, but I agree. I mean, social services for me would probably be a big deal, and not just the social services themselves, but even people put in place to help our community members navigate those social services.
We need community health workers
more
everywhere.
community health workers for sure, because we do have some really great programs, but what happens is if you don't know how to navigate them, they're just programs that are there.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing, a really big gap in our community, is people that know how to navigate their way through these social services. So I'd like to see the funding go there.
Well, all great answers. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add about the census, its importance, maybe some things that you guys find are important or have discovered while contributing to the effort in our community?
I guess if you haven't done it yet and you're watching this, if you see census anywhere, like be like, hey, count me, you know, like
Right.
we're going to be out at a bunch of different events coming up. As many as events are happening, basically we're trying to hook census reps up with those events. And so if you see it out there, please go and make sure you and your household are counted.
Right. And as you can see, we're talking to familiar faces in your community. If you don't know these three yet, hopefully you get the opportunity to get to know them. But clearly this is a personal impact for us. This isn't something that we're just trying to communicate as part of our jobs. They don't work for the city. They don't work for the census. We don't either. And so we're just wanting to help educate the public about the importance. I think that there's, and I'm sure you can all agree, that there's this taboo-ness maybe about the census because of maybe the confidentiality questions or the citizenship question that came up last year. But ultimately, none of that should be of concern. We work very closely with the census. We know that confidentiality is going to be treated very seriously, right? And the citizenship question is not there. And so that's what I want the message to take home is not only why it's important, but how it definitely comes down to the local level and it impacts us. And so hopefully these sort of conversations are helpful for you. It's surely helpful for each of us. It reminds me about the importance of it. And so we hope that it's important for you too. So did anyone else want to add to that?
Can I just say one thing?
Yes, absolutely.
This is an opportunity to be a part of lifting up your community without having any money, without having the best job. It doesn't matter where you work. It doesn't matter what color you are. This is a way that you can give back. This is a way that we can all be counted. This is a way that you can encourage your neighbors, because this impacts every single one of us that lives in Victoria.
Well said. So make sure that you count. So respond to the 2020 census today at my2020census.gov. Thank you again for watching. Thank you so much to our guests for joining us, Jodi,
Thank you.
Bethany, Celeste. We appreciate you. Shout out to Liberty Coffee House. That's where we're filming this location today. And so if you haven't already, make sure to like and share this video. Subscribe to our City View newsletter too at victoriatx.gov/communications. Until then, we hope to see you next time. Thanks.